So we started this that in the wrist, the light sensor, you can have a light sensor, but it's not maybe the best. And on the back or on the thigh, you have the advantage that people are not taking it off that often. And you mentioned that you are planning some studies. That could you tell more about what kind of studies you are planning?
Yeah, so currently, basically, I'm just trying a specific design where I just really want to understand how, all our daily lives, they're filled with so many different influences on sleep and then on our rhythm, and vice versa. Our sleep and then our circadian rhythm, of course, also influence the next day and what we do and how we feel. And so really, I want to understand how all of this is like, I want to understand the factors that influence our sleep in real life. And that might sound a bit like, hasn't that done someone yet? Because, it's a really basic question, but actually it's really, statistically, it's quite hard to do. And, many of the things, of the factors you can study in isolation much more easily. So you would focus, for example, on the influence of alcohol on sleep. And then many of the studies have been done in the lab where you can control all of these factors and influences. But in real life, it's much more complicated because, your life will look quite different than my life. And so, controlling for these influences and errors and deviations in statistically is a problem. But at the same time, I think this is really the way forward, because if we want to, give good recommendations on what is healthy sleep, or like how much light should you get out there when you go outside, or in general, how much light should I get so I have a healthy rhythm, so I have a healthy sleep. There are some recommendations, but they're really generic, they're really basic, and they don't help me in, achieving that goal. They don't tell me, yeah, okay, this is how I can get there, how I can really get the 2 hours of whatever light I need. And so I think we need this very personal view, this, integrating it personal recommendations, and then of course interventions when it's not about healthy sleep anymore, but, subclinical maybe, or even clinical. And so I think this is the way forward, and really we need to integrate it into your life and not just, give you generic recommendation.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think this podcast, we have had quite a bit of physical activity researchers, as the name is, physical activity
Yeah.
researcher. And I think there's kind of camps that you have physical activity researchers, they are now getting interested on sleep. And then you have sleep researchers who might be a little
Hmm.
bit interested of physical activity. And then you maybe have even circadian rhythm, which is a little bit different than the sleep camp, even though I see it as the same thing. How do you see bringing these closer? Because basically all of these things affect each other, and it would be interesting to study the interaction, but it seems that they are in different camps currently.
Yeah, I mean, that's very important. I think it's another example of where we have to work more. And I don't like interdisciplinary, because to me, I think we should think about more in anti-disciplines, because otherwise we're so, in our focus. So really, it's not about disciplines anymore. It's just that maybe about topics, or, working together anyways is, I think, a way forward. But you're completely right that the sleep and the circadian field, they've been very separate for many years. But like maybe the past 15, 20 years, they really become close. And now we attend each other's conferences, and there is many more researchers who do both. In terms of physical activity, I think there is room for improvement. But since you mentioned the example earlier about your camper van, I think you said you have camper van, and when you go outside and then camp maybe, and, that you be more tired more early in the evening.
Mm.
And there are exactly two influences. And so, for example, I'm a mountaineer. So when I go outside and go in the mountains and do some sports, I would be really tired in the evening. And then people would always say, oh, it was the exercise, and oh, it was the good air. And actually, I think so. I don't just think so. That there's really evidence saying it's both, and they are independent of each other. So you would have the activity part that's sort of, but it depends on the activity. You know that better than me, but I guess it depends. It could make you even be more alert in the evening, but generally, when you're really tired because it was strenuous, then it's more that it would make you more tired. But at the same time, the light that you receive throughout the day is also a very strong signal. And so
Mm.
you can study these things separately, and then you would see that both they add up. So the effect is bigger, but separately they also have an effect.
that really makes sense. I think a long day in the mountains, you definitely feel tired. There's many reasons,
Yeah.
but it's definitely you are tired, and
There's also the
it's
psychological aspect, actually. I forgot about that. So when you have really, it could be some very, an activity that might be dangerous or whatever. And so you have also this effect that you might be just mentally tired from this, that you were at your limits, basically.
yeah, that really makes sense. And you have done some validation measurements you did with the Fibion device, and you had some other device. Could you tell a little bit more what kind of setup you had, and what do you plan to test?
Yeah. It's just, basically at the moment we only have it in this really small field study where what I described earlier, that we try to understand the different factors that also influence sleep. And there we had the actimetry devices wearing at the same time, the participants were wearing the actimetry devices at the same time as the Fibion sensors. And so there I just really want to understand whether the algorithms that I would typically use are also applicable with the Fibion sensors, and at the moment just understand the pros and cons and where I could, for example, improve the design. So, and also the participant burden, because, since I already told you the light sensor isn't very sensible, having it at the wrist, getting rid of the actinimeter altogether and only have, for example, a light measurement somewhere at the eye level, and then combining that with a Fibion sensor would be interesting, because that reduces participant burden. And otherwise, I would have so many different devices on that participant. And also, some people, I forgot to say that earlier, some people, they really want to have their own watch or, their other devices like Fitbit or whatever. And I mean, when they participate in a small scale study, like a week or two, they are happy to get rid of these devices. But if I really want to understand their daily life, they also, of course, want to wear their daily devices. And so, reducing it to a minimum and having it as natural as possible for the participants, I think, is important.
And you are talking about the longer studies. Is there a lot of longer studies that in the levels we are, the day duration of the day is changing all the time. I see that your room got
Yeah.
dark now, so
Need to switch on the light.
it is changing. So probably even if you do measurement certain point, then you do it month later, it is different, the light exposure. So
Yeah.
other studies examining long periods like that have measured like more than few weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it depends a bit on what exactly you measure, but they are definitely studies. But often, if they even do it, because there are not many, but when they do it, then they would maybe do a week in summer, a week in winter, or additionally another one in spring and fall or autumn. And so why that makes sense, you still pick a very specific week, right? So I really want to do a more really long-term study where you follow people a long time, not just for 1 week. And also, I mean, then there's other studies that would follow the same people for many years, but again, just maybe 1 week. So you would see like the development over the years, but not necessarily throughout the year. And so it really depends on what period you pick, because photo period, for example, would be lengthening quite a lot during springtime. So during what we experience now, February, March, the days get longer quite more rapidly than, for example, between December and January. And so if you pick a specific period during your study, you might really, it might be a strong influence. And so, yeah, the reason why people haven't done this is because, or not so much, is because of funding, of course, because these studies just take much longer. And so we also have much fewer studies on these long-term rhythms, or like we would call that not circadian then, but for example, circadian rhythms. So circadian rhythms in humans are just much harder to study because it's such an effort, basically.
Yeah, I noticed myself. I think it was really cloudy January, so I started to notice that my circadian rhythm was getting bad because I didn't see the sun. I think the day wasn't that short, but I think January was hard. And now February has been sunny, and I've been sleeping much better. So you could basically do a study also that you would look like the actual sunlight from the weather reports, right?
I mean, that's a very interesting idea, and we are actually trying to get some data for Munich, for example, from the weather station, and relate that with where people were and what people did and so on. And of course, there are many other studies, for example, looking at mood, since you mentioned mood now, where people and there you can sort of use big data, for example, Twitter tweets or social media data, where people, would post specific things about their mood, like sad or whatever, and then relate that to the weather or to the specific time of day, for example, because that mood is also has a specific daily rhythm. So,
Yeah.
people would be less happy and a bit more depressed in the morning than in the afternoon, for example.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I come from Finland, and I have sometimes checked the weather reports.
Hmm.
And I think, for example, in the university city of Jyväskylä, the average sunlight is 8 hours in total in January. So all January days together. And then I checked it, and 1 year it was 1.5 hours, but there was a mark that some stations didn't work. So I'm not sure if it was like, but
Yeah.
if you really think it's not much, and yeah, I think it's not maybe the ideal
Yeah.
place for human beings to be.
Yeah.
Yes, so very very interesting discussions. I'm checking my notes. Like we quickly said something about the temperature sensor. How useful do you see temperature sensor being in this kind of sleep and circadian studies? Yeah, I think
I
it's
just
very
don't know.
nice that
Yeah.
I think it's very nice that your room got dark when we are talking about
Yeah, it was.
circadian rhythm. I think it's
It
clever.
was
Yeah.
perfect, yeah.
Yeah.
So now you can see horrible LED lights in the evening.
Now I can see light. Yeah. So yeah, I was asking about the temperature sensor, that some of the devices have
Hmm.
temperature sensor. How useful do you see it, and how could it be used?
Yeah, so this is something I haven't used myself yet, and I don't really know how useful it will be. Of course, we know that ambient temperature has an effect on your sleep, and so knowing that would be important for my study, where I study different, these daily factors that we have. I guess the thing is that nowadays we sort of live in this very controlled environment where we would set the temperature to a very specific and narrow range, since we can control it. And so I think the influence of temperature is a bit less than it was, when we lived in caves and so on. But nevertheless,
Mm.
you already noticed that, for example, when you go to a hotel, and I don't know about you, but for me, hotels are always overheated. So it's really warm and you hardly can air it. And so often we would have, this effect then that you find it harder to fall asleep if you're used to having a cold room where you
Mm.
sleep. And so I guess we can use the temperature function or the sensor there. I'm just not sure how good they are sometimes. So sometimes I think that's a question as well. So I don't really know. I haven't looked into this, I have to say. Another thing that can be used is, for example, to detect off-rest periods. So basically when you're not wearing the devices. So that's another sort of control mechanism where you could make sure that the person has been wearing the device.
So it depends whether the temperature sensor is against the skin or on the surface of the device, that which one
Yeah,
is
I
detecting.
guess
Yeah.
you would need both. Yeah.
Yeah. No, very interesting discussions. Is there something you want to add from research point of view to this discussion?
Well, I think it was we covered a lot.
Yeah.
Very, very nice discussions, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And is your lab, or are you looking for any collaborations? Probably a lot of listeners are from the physical activity side. Are you looking for something? Do you have any open positions or anything you want to advertise?
Um, well, I'm not sure about open positions, but you can always reach out, for sure, especially PhD students, I think, or some master or bachelors, but I'm not sure how many of these people will listen. But indeed, so since I mentioned that I look into the different factors, daily factors that affect sleep, of course, one of them is activity. And so since I'm not a physical scientist, I only do sports myself a lot. That doesn't really qualify me as a physical activity researcher. I really struggle with the idea of how we quantify sports here and what this, like, also, not in terms of what we can measure, for example, with the devices, but what people describe for themselves, what it is, what it does to them personally, like subjectively, I mean, also whether it's sports or whether it's, is it sports or exercise or is it activity? I mean, you guys probably, as far as I understand, this is still a bit of an open question, but I'm sure there are some ways of how you can really measure that more sensible than I did. And so, yeah, if people are interested in that and have some tips for me or, want to collaborate, just reach out and that would be nice. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that could be useful because especially if you wear the device on the thigh, you get good data for posture allocation and also for physical activity. You can even detect different types, cycling and different intensities. So that's a good offer. So if you're interested in collaboration and you collecting long-term data, so I think that would be
Yeah.
very interesting for many. So that's good. So very nice discussions. Thank you for taking the time for this podcast. It was a pleasure, Anna.
Thank you so much, Olli. Thank you.